My daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eyes and said, "We don't want this useless old woman in our house anymore." Child, those words cut through me sharper than any knife. I had scrubbed floors with these hands until the skin cracked. I had walked miles to bring bread home when your father was just a boy. I had stitched clothes by candlelight, with eyes burning, so no one would go to school in rags. And still, after all that, this was how I was spoken to, like a burden too heavy to carry. I remember sitting at the kitchen table that night. The plate in front of me was half empty, not because there wasn't food, but because my throat had closed tight from sorrow. My son, your father, sat quiet beside her. He did not defend me. His silence was worse than her words. I stared at him, hoping for one glance, one flicker of the boy I once rocked in my arms. But he kept his eyes down. I did not sleep much that night. I sat in my small room, the one tucked away at the end of the hall, listening to their whispers through the walls. They thought I could not hear, but every syllable reached me. They spoke of selling the house, of moving me out. "She has lived her years," she said. "Let her find her own way now. Do you know what it feels like, child, to be erased while still breathing? To be treated as though your heartbeat no longer matters." That was the night I first understood the cruelty of ingratitude. The very next morning, there came a knock at the door. My heart jumped. I thought perhaps it was a neighbor, maybe Mrs. Turner bringing me apples from her garden. But no. It was a man in a grey suit, tall, stiff, holding papers in his hand. His eyes scanned the living room like he already owned it. He asked for my son. I stood there, the floor cold beneath my bare feet, my hands trembling against the frame of the door. I could not yet know what those papers meant. But in my bones, I felt it, the storm was coming. Before I tell you what happened next, you must understand where I came from. For storms don't just arrive, they test what's been built, and what's been lost. I was born in a small town in Kentucky, during the years when hope was a rare thing. My father died in a mining accident when I was only 6. My mother took in washing from neighbors, scrubbing clothes in icy water until her knuckles bled. I helped her as best I could, carrying buckets heavier than my little arms could bear. We ate bread soaked in milk, then sometimes only that. When I was 16, I met your grandfather, James. He was a tall man with quiet eyes. He worked at the lumber mill, hands rough with splinters, but his touch was always gentle with me. We had nothing but a rented room in Big James, but we built life one nail at a time. Together we bought this very house, plank by plank, paying with sweat and small wages. I remember the smell of fresh wood, the sound of hammers echoing in the evening, the way he laughed when rain came pouring through the unfinished roof. We were poor, yes, but rich in each other. Then came the years of sacrifice. I bore children, one after another, and life became a cycle of giving. I walked miles to fetch water, washed diapers by hand, cooked meals from scraps. When James fell ill, I worked twice as hard. I ironed clothes for the richer families in town, sewed dresses I could never wear, mended shoes with thread too thin for leather. Nights were long, days were longer, but I told myself that it was worth it. For my children, it was worth everything. When your father was a boy, he would cling to my skirts, asking why I had blisters on my feet. I would smile, though my body ached, and say, "Because every step I take is for you." That is the truth, child. Every breath I drew, every coin I earned, every tear I shed, it was for them. But years have a way of twisting what was once straight. Children grow. Gratitude fades. And sometimes the very ones you lift on your shoulders will forget who carried them. That night, after the man in the grey suit left, I sat alone in the dim light of my lamp. My hands rested on the old wooden table James and I had bought second-hand all those years ago. I traced the grooves and scratches with my fingers, each mark a memory. I thought about the sacrifices carved into the bones of this house, and I wondered, would all of it vanish, just like that? Child, I need you to know this: love is not always returned, and sacrifice is not always remembered. But that does not make it meaningless. What we give from the heart is never truly lost. It lives on, sometimes quietly, waiting to be seen again. So when they called me useless, when they wished me gone, I did not shout. I did not beg. I simply kept my silence, holding the weight of years in my chest. For I knew something they did not. And that, my dear, is the secret I carried for 30 years. The knock on the door that morning was not just wood meeting wood, it was fate, rapping against everything I had built. The man in the grey suit introduced himself as Mr. Whitman, a representative from the bank. He had that practiced politeness people in power wear, the kind that hides still behind a smile. He said he had business with my son about the house. I stood frozen, child, my heart pounding like a drum. You see, to them, the son I had raised and the wife who wanted me gone, the house was theirs. They believed it was under my son's name, his inheritance, his right. But that was not the truth. When Mr. Whitman left, carrying his briefcase and his papers, my son returned to the table with his wife. I could feel their whispers buzzing through the air. They wanted me gone sooner than I imagined. That night, I sat by the window, rocking slowly in the old chair your grandfather built. The moonlight spilled across the floorboards we had once nailed together with our bare hands. My mind wandered back to the years when James and I first signed the deed to this house. Child, let me tell you something I never told them. When James was still alive, he worried about what might happen if he were taken from me too soon. He saw how I carried burdens without complaint, how I gave every ounce of myself to our children. One winter evening, with the wind howling outside and the lamp burning low, he pressed my hands into his. Mary, he said, this house will always be yours. Promise me you'll keep it in your name. Our children may forget what we've given, but the roof we built together should never be taken from you. So, with the last of his strength, we went to the notary and signed the deed in my name, mine alone. I kept that paper hidden, folded in a small box with my wedding photograph, deep inside my trunk. For 30 years, no one knew. I bore the silence of that secret, carrying it like a stone in my chest. I did it not out of selfishness, but out of survival. I had seen enough in life to know how quickly security could be snatched away. And so, I let my children believe the house would one day be theirs, while I safeguarded the truth in silence. But silence, child, is a double-edged sword. It protects, yes, but it also isolates. For years, I watched my children take and take, believing more would always be given. They thought I owed them my years, my labor, my very breath. Never once did they think the foundation beneath their feet was mine to protect. When your father's wife called me useless, she did not know the ground she stood upon was secured by these very hands she mocked. That is what wounded me most, not her words, but the ignorance of all I had done, all I had sacrificed. Days after Mr. Whitman's visit, their whispers grew louder. I overheard them planning. She wanted to sell the house, move to the city, live in comfort. He agreed in silence. I could see the greed blooming in her eyes, the way she looked at the walls as if they were stacks of money. One evening, she shoved a plate toward me at dinner, her voice sharp. Eat faster, you're too slow. My son stayed quiet, staring into his food. I lowered my eyes, said nothing. But inside, the secret pulsed like a heartbeat. I remembered walking barefoot to the mill to bring James his lunch, remembered hauling buckets of water on my shoulders when my spine already bent from age. I remembered holding my children against my chest during storms, telling them the roof would never let the rain in because their father and I had built it strong. And now, that same roof covered their ungrateful whispers. Still, I stayed silent. I did not reveal the deed. Not yet. Because, child, timing is everything. A truth spoken too soon can be wasted, but a truth revealed at the right moment can shatter the very ground beneath your feet. The suspense grew inside me like a storm cloud. Each time they looked at me with contempt, each time I was dismissed, I felt the secret burning hotter. I wondered when the storm would break. But in the quiet moments, when I sat alone, I also wondered if I was wrong to keep it hidden. Perhaps if I had told them sooner, they would have been kinder. Perhaps they would have understood. Yet, I knew better. Kindness that comes from ownership is not true kindness. They had shown me their hearts, and I believed them. One night, as I sat by the window, I clutched the box in my lap. Inside was the folded deed, yellowed with aged edges fraying. I traced my name on the paper with trembling fingers, a Mary Thompson. My name, not his. Not theirs. Mine. Tears blurred my eyes, child. Not for the house, but for the years of love I had given without measure. I asked myself, was it worth it? Was every blister, every sleepless night, every sacrifice worth children who now turned away? Yes, it was. Because love is never wasted, even when it is not returned. That is what I want you to remember. Still, I waited. Waited for the moment when the truth would no longer be just mine, but theirs to face. And that moment came sooner than they expected. One morning, I woke to the sound of voices raised in anger. Mr. Whitman had returned. Papers in hand. My son's wife was furious, demanding explanations, insisting the house was theirs to sell. But Mr. Whitman shook his head, his voice steady. I'm afraid, Mom, this property is not under your husband's name. The deed belongs to Mary Thompson. My name. Spoken aloud, like a bell ringing after 30 silent years. The room went still. Their faces drained of color. And for the first time in decades, I lifted my head, straightened my back, and met their eyes. The storm had broken. And child, that was only the beginning. Still, child, I kept quiet until the morning when the truth could no longer remain hidden. Mr. Whitman's voice had already cut the air, declaring the deed was in my name. For a moment, the house was silent. My daughter-in-law's fork slipped from her hand and clattered on the table. My son's face went pale, his jaw tight as though he'd swallowed stones. What do you mean? She stammered, her voice sharp but trembling. Mr. Whitman simply nodded toward me. This home belongs to Mrs. Mary Thompson. It always has. Then he left, leaving behind more than silence. He left behind truth, bare and undeniable. I sat there, my fingers folded in my lap, heart steady in a way it had not been for years. My son turned to me, his eyes a storm of confusion and anger. Why didn't you tell us? He asked. I wanted to shout, to pour out every sacrifice, every night I had walked the floor with fevered children, every meal I skipped so they could eat, every stitch of clothing I mended with bleeding fingers. But I didn't shout. I spoke soft, because soft words carry heavier truths. Because you never asked what I carried, son. You only took. His wife broke in, her words like knives. This isn't fair. We deserve this house. We've lived here all these years. I looked at her, not with hate but with pity. Fair. I whispered. Fair was me working myself to the bone so your husband could grow strong. Fair was me keeping food on this table when there was none to buy. Fair was me washing your clothes when my hands were raw. And still, I asked for nothing. Not even kindness. She opened her mouth again, but my son held up his hand. His eyes lowered. For the first time, I saw shame flicker across his face. That evening, I sat once more by the window, watching the fading sun paint the walls gold. My trunk lay open beside me, the old deed spread across my lap. My grandson, you, child, sat at my feet, wide-eyed, listening. Grandma, you whispered, why didn't you ever tell them? Weren't you afraid? I smiled faintly. My heart ached, but it also felt lighter than it had in years. Sometimes, my dear, survival isn't about shouting the truth. It's about holding it close until the world is ready to hear it. I wasn't afraid of losing the house. I was afraid of losing myself. For days after, the house was filled with tension. My daughter-in-law no longer looked me in the eye. My son avoided me, shame curling around him like smoke. But you stayed. You sat with me in the evenings, asking questions, holding my hand. And that was when I realized why I had endured it all. Not for thanks, not for applause, not even for loyalty from those who betrayed me. I endured so that you would learn. Love, my child, is not always returned. Sacrifice is not always honored. But hope is what keeps us alive. The years of bitterness fell away as I spoke to you. I wanted you to understand that strength is not in fists or harsh words, but in the quiet endurance of a heart that refuses to give up. One night, as the wind rattled the shutters, you asked me, "Grandma, do you forgive them?" I closed my eyes. I saw James's face, his rough hands holding mine, his voice telling me to keep the house safe. I saw my children laughing as little ones, before greed hardened them. And I saw myself, tired, worn, but still standing. "Yes," I said softly. "I forgive them. Because carrying anger is heavier than carrying secrets. And I have carried enough." Tears rolled down my cheeks, but they were not bitter tears. They were the kind that wash away pain. "Now, child, you know my secret, the one I kept buried for 30 years. This house, these walls, this roof, they are more than wood and nails. They are my life, my scars, my strength. And one day, when I am gone, they will be yours. Not as a burden, but as a reminder. A reminder that even when the world mocks you, even when those you love betray you, you can endure. You can rise. That is the lesson I leave you with. Survival is not about never falling, it is about rising every single time, even when your knees shake. Love may wound, loss may break you, but hope will carry you home. So remember me not as the useless old woman they once called me, but as the woman who held on, who endured, and who showed them, and you, who was truly strong. And with that, I folded the deed, placed it back in the trunk, and closed the lid. The past was behind me. The future sat before me, bright-eyed or full of questions, holding my hand. You